All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful evening wherever you are in Australia or overseas. Last week we were very privileged to venture from outside our little bubble island here in Australia to the UK. But this evening we're going to be presenting yet another special edition of the Q&A series here for the Sydney Saxophone Network. For those who don't know, my name is Nathan, and I will be your host slash compare slash whatever you'd like to call it. This evening we have a very esteemed guest all the way north of the border here in New South Wales. Most people would probably be aware of this particular individual, but if not, we'd like to just give you a little bit of a background on who we're going to be talking to this evening. And of course, that is our guest from Queensland, Dr. Diana Tolmie. Now, Dr. Tolmie has had a very exciting and lucrative career as a freelance woodwind specialist. She has performed in a variety of different musical settings, is quite versatile in terms of what she does, performing small chamber groups, solo, musical theatre, you name it, she's done it pretty much. She's also an extremely proactive researcher, particularly in the field of music, the music profession. So looking at things like how to sort of upskill students and prepare them better for a career in music, post-university levels and things like that, which we'll be talking about. She is currently a full-time senior lecturer at the Queensland Conservatorium, the Griffith University, teaching saxophone, pedagogy, musician's health, and vocational preparation, as we discussed. There's so much we're going to talk about, but I don't want to sort of spoil too much. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tolmie. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Nathan. It's just fantastic to be here and wonderful to be asked to be part of your Saxophone Network Q&A.
No worries. And thanks for taking the time out to coming along. It's you're definitely on my hit list in terms of people to interview. So you are on the list for sure. Now, do you mind if I call you Di? Just be a bit weird.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please.
Just be a bit strange after knowing you for a few years already. So, look, we're going to start with a bit of an icebreaker. It's just a nice way to sort of ease into this little session we've got here. Now, you are, as we said, a woodwind specialist. You do clarinet and saxophone equally, and I believe some other woodwind instruments as well. But would I start off with what sort of made you gravitate towards the saxophone in particular? Was it a natural progression from clarinet, or was there something else involved?
No, I think it was a natural progression. I had a teacher back in high school called Brad Millard, and he was a woodwind doubler as well in music theatre, and he was doing all the shows at the time up in Brisbane. And I guess I just sort of gravitated naturally towards the saxophone from the clarinet because cough splutter, it's very similar, but it's not. We know it's not. But yeah, it was just one of those things that was in school. So I think I'm trying to sort of remember, I started clarinet pretty early. I think it was about 9 or 10, and then I think it was around about grade 9 or 10 that I gravitated towards the saxophone and did the usual thing where it's the instrument that if you want to play in jazz band, that's the instrument that you pick up so that you can play in jazz band or stage band. And the school that I was at, while I wouldn't say it had a massive music program compared to what is now, it certainly had a really enthusiastic one. And so they were really super encouraging and let me use the saxophone. And then I was really spoiled and got one of my own and got into it that way. So that was, a natural progression in that respect. And then it just developed on from there.
Okay, nice. Now, I've been trying to do a bit of background research for this interview, and I've had it's all good. It's all good. But I've had a really hard time finding any information about your sort of like your early education and like sort of who you learnt off and your undergraduate studies and whatnot. And just it'd be great to sort of find out a little bit sort of your journey from where you started to your start of your professional career, like sort of how you sort of came along.
into the saxophone?
Oh yeah, well, saxophone, clarinet. I mean, obviously it's a saxophone channel, but if the clarinet comes up, we're not going to be offended in any way.
Okay, excellent, good. Yeah, well, I went to the conservatorium, did my undergraduate in clarinet, with the aspirations of being an orchestral clarinetist. And by second year, I was actually working as a casual with the then Queensland Philharmonic Orchestra and the Queensland Symphony Orchestra on clarinet. So I did a complete degree in clarinet, but in second year, I also started learning jazz saxophone, funnily enough, from Tony Hobbs.
Oh, wow.
As second study. And he was, funnily enough, he was a pretty interesting character. And he was very nice and said, oh, you've got a good set of ears on you, and basically started, doing a whole bunch of charts and all that kind of stuff. So I started getting my improvisation chops up. But I also expressed the interest of wanting to do classical music as well. And so he recognized that I was quite a practicer, and so started giving me a whole bunch of classical music to actually start learning as well. And I think was also happy that I could read, because not to say that jazz musicians can't read, because they can, but I think just at that level, I think my skills were just a bit higher than just the other saxophonists at the time that were going through, that they had these amazing ears. So what they had in ears, I guess I had in eyes. And so he could sort of see that. So I think he was actually really sort of encouraging in that respect. But funnily enough, I found the two instruments, particularly with the oral cavity, was actually sort of battling between the two. And so it was a case, I actually had to have to sit down at the end of second year and decide which way I was actually going to go with clarinet or saxophone, because I knew that they were just getting really opposing. But by that stage, I was getting a lot of work with the orchestra, and I had some very strong counselling that just said, no, young Padawan, don't go towards the dark light, use the force and stick with the clarinet. So in many ways, that was a good thing, because the clarinet did open up actually a lot of freelance doors that otherwise hadn't. So my pathway to the saxophone from a professional standpoint was really more my own curiosity, and driven by my own curiosity. And then I started getting work. I was teaching heaps, and then I started getting work at the conservatorium teaching saxophone, and I recognized my own failings, I guess, in ignorance about the instrument. And so what I then did was that when I would actually get shows, I saw that as a surplus in funds, and so I would actually reinvest it back into the saxophone students at the conservatorium. So I would actually get guest lecturers in, guest saxophonists in, and so I was learning alongside the students, but perhaps at a faster rate, because I could connect all the dots a little bit quicker. So I sort of say that there's three forms of teaching. There's sage on the stage, where you're the keeper of all the knowledge and just basically, spout what it is. You've got guide on the side, where you're sort of helping the students find their own path. And then you meddler in the middle, where you're learning, like it's a co-learning kind of environment. So I sort of saw myself as that role model for the students, where it's like, let's just keep the curiosity alive, and let's have a journey together. And to be honest, that was some of the funnest years of my life, of like, okay, well, let's go to Scotland, and let's go to the World Saxophone Congress and do this saxophone orchestra stuff. Have you ever conducted one before? No, not really, but let's try. We've got 3 years to save up and go overseas and do this kind of stuff. Let's do that. So formal training, no. Informal training, yes. And then further studies of my own, and further research of my own, and just trying to really sort of work out that instrument.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. It's sort of parallel to what Mark Walton did here, and like, same thing. Start off on clarinet primarily, gravitated towards saxophone, and sort of learned as he went along, and worked with the students, and had that sort of collaborative learning situation where he sort of fed off what was going on there. And cool, interesting.
It was interesting in the sense also that there was transferable knowledge from the clarinet. And then there was stuff that I was just like, nah, that's not the same. It's just not the same. It can't possibly be the same. But what was really good, that if there was something that didn't sound right, I would just assume straight away it was me, And so I would actually troubleshoot as to, well, how can I make me better? I would never sort of go, oh, it's the instrument, or you know, this is just what the saxophone does. You know, it was never like that. It was like, okay, well, that doesn't sound right, so it must be something wrong with me. So it was kind of like that journey where I was actually owning all of my own education, which was kind of a really different experience to my clarinet education, where I was educated by these people who were, you know, well, particularly Floyd Williams, he's arguably one of the world's best teachers of clarinet, right? So we had that. So if, you know, what he told you was just like, yeah, you got to follow that. And so, because he's right, you know, but in that self-discovery sort of way of learning, that was really, really, or sorry, still is really fun.
And I think that's an important thing. Like being able to sort of understand and reverse engineer, you know, what's going wrong and the processes involved, and you know, you benefit from that not only as a performer but as a teacher and educator, because you have a better understanding of what's going on and the mechanics behind that. So
yeah, definitely.
For sure. Yeah, we did have a question. Looks like it's been answered, but it was just yeah, what was the name and spelling of your teacher who is the jazz saxophonist? And Brendan replied Tony Hodds, and that's double B-S?
Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
Yep.
Nice. All right. Sorry about that. A bit of a delay with the chat, but all good. Now, in terms of your, like, the lessons that you received, now it doesn't have to be saxophone sort of centric. We can talk about clarinet here, but in terms of, like, you know, early tuition and early lessons and things like that, was there a standout teacher or lesson that really was memorable to you in terms of, you know, sticking with you as a professional player to this day, like a lifelong lesson that you've come across that sort of really stuck in terms and helped you sort of formulate who you are now as a player?
Yeah, again, I mean, I've been really lucky. I've had many teachers in the sense I've had Floyd for a real sort of staple part of my education. I also got a Churchill Fellowship to go around and learn off some really impressive clarinet and bass clarinet musicians around the world. And then naturally, you know, you go to World Sax Congresses and you sit in on masterclasses and just are blown away by all of that as well. So I've got several moments. Funnily enough, Floyd said something to me that ironically has nothing but everything to do with music. He said things don't go ahead unless things don't keep going ahead unless you make plans, right? So in other words, always just plan, and stuff will happen. Yeah. Another thing he said, if you don't ask, you don't get. So that was also actually a really good thing that I just thought, well, and it sort of instilled a bit more bravery into me as to, you know, why to sort of go ahead and do stuff. Weirdly, another thing he said once, he said, you know, you don't have to chop up onions. You can actually buy them pre-chopped up at the Coles. And so I was just like, okay. So I've never looked at an onion the same since. But because every time I'm chopping them, I'm going, I don't have to do this. I could go to Coles. Anyway, so that was also like, okay, well, look ahead for stuff that you don't actually have to re-engineer the wheel for absolutely everything. Always just try and search for different kinds of options. Andrew Mariner, I had a really good series of lessons with him in London. And his way of playing is borderline spiritual, and his concept of tone and legato was something that I think I've actually transferred into all of my instrumental playing. And his sound was something that, really sort of spoke to me as well. So that was really fantastic. I had lessons with Harry Spane in Amsterdam, and also Henri Bock in Rotterdam for a significant amount on my Churchill Fellowship. And also Michael Lowenstern was fantastic because I had him in New York, and he is brilliant in the sense that he's just such a creative soul. And I think he was probably one of the first people that taught me to view your instrument as the most amazing toy that you can just play with, and there's all different kinds of sounds, and to think out of the box and not accept status quo. So he's and also he continues to be a role model because he constantly evolves himself and doesn't accept status quo, and he's actually a real diverse musician and human being in a lot of different kind of employment sort of areas. So so all those people and more, you know, sitting in on different people's lessons. I can see Neil's popped into the room. So hey, Neil's seeing his lessons. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, I could go on and on and on, and you don't have that amount of time. So.
Wow, no, certainly a lot there. And we will be delving a little bit more into your Churchill Fellowship stuff a bit later on. But yeah, certainly a lot to unpack there. And all those very influential players and educators. Michael Lowenstein, I hate to admit, but I've only sort of recently come to be aware of him. In COVID, there was a lot of downtime, of course, for everyone. And yeah, it's just, he's really a unique musician, and yeah, very innovative and original in what he does. So yeah, cool. Now, in terms of your playing career, you've done pretty much anything and everything in terms of woodwind that's possible. You've done your orchestral playing, some solo playing, chamber music, and we'll be going into that in a little bit more detail with your ensemble, and also musical theatre and things like that. In terms of the opportunities that came about, I know that you said like your association with the Queensland Philharmonic, as it used to be called, and then sort of led towards some teaching opportunities at the con up there. How did you how did you come across these opportunities? Did you create yourself, or did you take the advice that was said previously and just was proactive and just asked? And like how did you how did you sort of get started?
A concept I always sort of say to the students is just always say yes, particularly in the early days of when you're starting out, and even say yes to stuff where you take a risk and someone's asked you to do something and you haven't worked out how to do that yet, but you say yes anyway, with the idea that if you're going to fail, you'll fail spectacularly, but learn. Or if you get even halfway there, then you've actually learnt a significant amount regardless. And so we call that a protean approach, and so which basically just means that you're really sort of adaptable and also can see sort of the past, present and future and turn your head accordingly to sort of see where things will take you. So I said yes to absolutely everything. And then also there's, as usual, these things, it's sort of right place, right time. So even getting like casual work with the symphony orchestra in second year. I mean, I started the con when I was 16, turning 17.
Oh, wow.
So I hadn't turned 18 yet when I started my first work in a professional orchestra. And aside from the fact of being unbelievably naive, I think I was actually quite stupid as well. But anyway, so I was in a lesson with Floyd, and he just got off the phone and just said, "Hey, are you available Thursday?" And I just went, "Yes." And he said, "Great, we'll put you in and we'll get you to do some work with the orchestra." And I went, "Okay, do you want to?" And he's like, "Do you want to do that?" I'm like, "Yes." So I just, for some reason, knew at a very young age, you just say the word yes to absolutely everything. And so that's what I did. So I started out orchestral stuff, and then the usual sort of thing of just being prepared for success. You just try and work your ass off. Sorry, do not swear. Do not swear. You try and work
every time. Every time.
You try and work really, really hard, and just make sure that you're just going to do the right thing, and be nice to everyone and not antagonize anyone, and just do your job absolutely as best as you can. And I guess I got a reputation for that. And so that sort of snowballed. And then it was suggested, okay, well, let's do casual auditions for QSO. So I did that. And then your snowball starts to increase, and you start to sort of get known, and people will know you as the person who says yes, the person who'll turn up on time, do the right thing, be as professional as possible, and do the best they can, and try to be a nice person. So all that sort of combination. I mean, you don't succeed with everything all the time. That's just you're only human. But at least in the early days, that was sort of the mantra of that's just what you do. Was it? Be nice, do nice, smell nice, play nice. Yeah, it's just like it's just that kind of approach in general. So yeah, it literally just snowballed. So everything I did, even musical theatre, that was a case of someone was sick. Could you come in and dep? Yes. And so here's the music 2 nights beforehand, practiced a lot, made sure I was best as prepared as possible, went in, played. Oh, okay, you can play. And then suddenly other members of the band started getting sick, and so I was getting popped in to that, and then your reputation just progresses from there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and very sound advice. Still true to this day. Just say yes, be polite, be reliable, and the phone should keep ringing.
Should ring. I mean, even with my introduction to the flute, because by that stage I was playing a lot of clarinet, saxophone, even orchestrally. I know saxophone players are going to hate this, but they look at the clarinet and go, "Can you play saxophone?" Yes, I can. All right, well, you've got the gig, and that's like to hardcore saxophone players. But a lot of learning in that as well. But even with the flute, so I had a musical director ring me up once and say, "Oh, can you play the flute?" And I said no. There was one time I actually said no, and then she said, "Oh, do you reckon you'll learn it in 3 months? I've got a gig for you." And I went, "Oh, we'll give it a go." So I went out, got myself a flute, and in 2 weeks I was playing with Olivia Newton-John.
Sweet.
On flute.
Nice.
That's just, I just don't know how that works, but it just does. So, yeah. And even that job, and it wasn't just flute, it was also alto flute as well. And the musical director, and there was this one bit where I was playing, had to play something really low on the alto flute, and I just couldn't. I just hadn't worked out the animal yet, and just the transposition and the blowing and the breathing, the whatever. It was just too soon. So I Obi-Wan Kenobi'd him and went, "You don't want this solo down an octave. You want this solo up an octave, don't you?" And he's like, "Yes, I do. I want that solo." And I said, "Well, there you go." And afterwards, he comes up to me and says, "Yeah, that sounds so much better up the octave." And then for the rest of the tour around Australia, everyone had to play this solo up the octave. So yeah.
Wow. No, that's quite an experience, going from learning flute to doing a gig with Olivia Newton-John after a couple of months. Amazing.
2 weeks.
We do have a question from the gallery from Brendan on flute. What's your question there, Brendan?
Hi, Diana. I think I'm in the exact same position that you're describing. So, I started on clarinet, then got into lots of saxophone stuff, and now I'm tackling flute and even oboe and bassoon, which is kind of daunting.
And, well done.
Yeah, being a clarinetist and saxophonist, always used to aiming my air straight down all the time, and struggle with, just being able to pick up the flute and start a pianissimo high B straight away. Do you have any tips or tricks? How you tackled learning?
Yeah. When I first started playing the flute, it was obscenely out of tune because I was approaching it like I'd blow a trumpet. And I remember one musical theatre gig we did. It was a smaller ensemble, and the violinist was sitting next to me, and he had perfect pitch, and I felt so sorry for him because I knew I was playing heinously sharp. And he went over to me and went, "Diana, do you know that you're playing just a little bit sharp?" And I said, "Well, it depends what you mean. Is it 40 cents sharp or 40 cents flat to the next note?" So less is more. That was definitely a moment where I basically went, I have to get some decent flute lessons. And so I had a couple lessons from a really good colleague who was naturally a flute specialist, and then I also had a couple lessons from a friend of mine who's a really good doubler. And basically, she taught me the language that for if a flute player might say, move your muscles a certain way, or they'll say certain words that to a clarinet player will actually interpret in a certain way, and very aggressively so. But the flute is literally something you put on your face and you blow. And even when you're aiming for that high pianissimo B, blow it like you expect to crack it, and it'll actually probably come out. Because we approach it with this almost sense of fear that we have to get it, and we try and control, and that's the worst thing you can do with the flute. Just let it happen and let your mind's ear really rule a lot more, and just play like a jellyfish.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah,
cool.
But yeah, less is more from clarinet to flute.
All right. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Di, for that one. Now, just moving on. Now, you're, as I said, you do a lot of different things, and one of the biggest things that you do, one of your biggest projects, is your chamber group, which is Collusion. Now, if you haven't heard of this group, I'd highly recommend everyone go check it out. I had the good fortune of hearing this ensemble a few times, and in their home ground in Brisbane a couple of years ago, and there's some great music coming out of there. Now, the ensemble is quite unique, as it is a group which focuses on, and I believe this is still to be correct, the commissioning of Australian music with the emphasis of a collaboration between music and dance and movement. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's still the case. I mean, we're having a bit of a hiatus this year.
I think
COVID.
everyone is at the moment.
Yeah, there will be no dancing. Yeah, so there's a bit of a hiatus, and half of us are in Melbourne and half of us are in Brisbane. And the leadership of the group is definitely Ben Greaves, the violinist, and he's residing in Melbourne with his partner Gareth, who's our choreographer. So both Ben and Gareth are brilliant artists in particular. But yeah, so it's evolved. It's been an ensemble that's actually been around for just trying to think if it's actually hitting 20 years, and it's done a lot of work. I was privileged to be part of it, doing that too with Musica Viva in schools program as well. So a lot of touring, and it evolved more into dance, with particularly Ben's desire just to be more creative and to do cross genre, because he felt that was the trend. Not just the trend, it was just something that was more accessible, and a way to sort of have more accessible music that's communicated in various forms to an audience that wants to be accessed effectively. So in addition to that, Ben's creative mind, he's just this person that just conceives something and then just says, let's just go do it. There's no obstacles in his mind. It's just, let's go ahead and do this. So one in particular dance collaboration that we did was called Desire Lines, and where basically we got an animator to design an animation where the music actually gets projected onto the floor, and it scrolls. It doesn't. We've tried a bunch of stuff, but scrolling, but effectively sort of has the sheet of music on the floor, and we as musicians also become. Loosely, I'm going to call it dancers. I would just like to say moving instrumentalists, because the dancing's not that graceful. But yeah, and we could actually read the music on the floor. So it's actually projected white onto black, varying costumes, and plus with 3 dancers as well. So we toured that one to China a couple of years ago, and that was really amazing. We performed that in a bunch of festivals as well. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Now, just out of curiosity, as you say, how did you get involved with this ensemble? Were you there from the early days, or did you come on board later on, or like how did you sort of get roped into it?
Yeah, the clarinetist at the time moved on, and they literally just rang up and said, "Oh, would you like to be part of this?" And I said, "Yeah."
Yeah, there you go again.
I said, yes, I would. And so that all came together, and yeah, it's been a really, really lovely journey. So I think I came on board with them 2010.
Okay.
I think, yeah. And what was really cool was that previously they were working with clarinet, piano, cello, violin, and then occasionally a singer. But because Ben also doubles on viola, and naturally with my doubles, they were actually really open to, basically sort of starting to commission music that was more versatile. So, yeah, that might be my cat. Yes, that's my cat tearing up my couch there. Very good. So.
He's all right. He's not. Now, in terms of the like the music, like as I said, it's all sort of new Australian music. How do you go about the commissioning process and the workshopping process? Is there is there dance and choreography involved from the initial process? Do you do like a composer performer collaboration in the early stages? Like how would a typical sort of program be developed?
Yeah, it's a big it depends. Again, Ben's someone who has more the vision of just the music itself, but we've been in some actually collaborations. We did one with Trichotomy, which is also a jazz trio up in Brisbane that does a lot of new music. They have a really sort of specific sound. But long story short is that we might sort of use music that has been already been composed and is just set as it is. And so the dancers will listen to that, and Gareth will basically sort of design something accordingly. We've had workshops as the musicians with the dancers, listening to the music and actually having to interpret like physically and create. And so we've actually created some moves, the musicians have, that have just literally evolved, and it's become improvisatorial. So I think there was one that we called handy army army smell the armpit. Like, it was just the only way to remember these things. It was just bizarre. And then sometimes we've approached composers and just said, we want to do this thing. This is the brief. This is most likely how it will look. These are the tempos that we're going to need for the dancers. This is the style. So there's one I'm thinking of that needed to be electronic. This is how the music's going to scroll. This is what the lighting's going to do. Show us what you can do. And so there would be like a couple of drafts, and we would sort of workshop with those and find out what's possible and what's impossible. There'd be revisions, and it would be that sort of process. Tom Green would come in and he would always say, I need to watch the ensemble first. I need to see you guys play, so play anything, but I just want to see what it is that you do, how you sound, so that I can literally write best accordingly to you guys, because if it's you guys playing it, you'll play it best if I understand how you work. So he saw us, I guess, as one big instrument, I suppose, as opposed to separate moving parts, or just as, oh, it's this kind of ensemble. But it was like, no, it's these people making this cohesive sound that have this kind of spirit, and therefore I'll write to that, and did a great job.
Okay, cool. Tom Green's an interesting name. We will get to that because he sort of pops up a bit later on in a few other things, particularly saxophone centric, but we'll come back to that. In terms of your time in the group and performance wise, do you have a particular concert highlight with your time with the group? Like any particular concert that sticks out?
That's a good question. I mean, broadly, it's that you sort of feel that that the connection and the connectivity was actually really there, that you actually felt that it wasn't just a really good experience from a technical perspective. It was also that you actually felt like something new had happened, I suppose, and it felt like it was progressing more again as that sort of, that real one unified, that you created a new instrument, I guess especially. We played in the Brisbane Festival a couple of years back, and that was at the Judith Wright Centre, and all of that was through a bunch of startup mentorship grants, and we had funding and all sorts of stuff, and that was really good because it was a full house. And really great reviews, and that was really clearly something that had literally started out of nothing. Like, it had been created from nothing and workshopped and developed, and then that's where it sort of went to. And then there was another one at the Brisbane Powerhouse as well, same kind of thing, where it was just really well patronised, part of the Restrung Festival. Okay. And it worked out really well. Nice. And China was pretty amazing. China, actually, because we went to Guangzhou, and that was really fascinating, where we would be stoked if we got, between 200 or 800 people in the audience and great reviews and all that kind of stuff for what we were doing. But because of the population in Guangzhou and, it being a dance collaborative as well, we had 2,000 people in the audience each night. And That was just, we'd never experienced that before. That was pretty amazing. And then we workshopped with the dancers, the equivalent of like a university class, a couple of days later, and they asked questions, and we workshopped some other moves and music and all the rest of it. And that was insightful to get their perspective of what they saw and what they heard as well. So that was a really nice insight into how a different culture would think about what it is that you're doing when you're playing Australian music to them.
Wow. No, it's interesting. And you're so true. Like, it's sort of things that really relate to you and engage with you are really something that stick in your mind, and also those sort of surreal experiences, like I say, like in China, for sure. Now, your chamber music's one of those things, particularly for saxophone players, because we don't necessarily have the opportunity to walk into an orchestral position, and teaching positions are scarcer and scarcer, and if you want to be a performer, there's sort of only a finite amount of opportunities there, and chamber music's definitely an avenue to look towards for people to develop their careers and continue on performing. What advice would you give to, say, younger students, like recent graduates, in terms of setting up a chamber group? Like, from your experiences working with your ensembles, is there any sort of tricks or tips, not necessarily tips or tricks, but just advice or words of wisdom that you could impart in terms of how they could get started, or what sort of things they should be watching out for if setting up a chamber group?
Yeah, I think if setting up a chamber group, I mean, yes, it's fundamental that you want to be able to play at a reasonable standard. But that's not the only thing. It's whether you can actually get on and understand in a rehearsal situation that no idea is a bad idea, and to really try everything. So that's probably a big thing. And in all of your rehearsals, just to maintain respect for each other and think of the long term. Like, really think of it like a marathon and not like a short sprint. So, and if you're thinking of it like that way, it'll really moderate how you behave and how respectful you are to everyone in the group, and make it a really nice work environment, because that's effectively what it is at the end of the day. I think also from the outset, like when you're starting out, there's a lot to be said for the first 500 concerts. So you're going to learn a lot, that 10,000 hour rule. Yes, it's going to be 10,000 good hours, but those first 500 concerts are going to be absolute gold, and everyone's going to be really instrumental in forming the group that you are. So accept that mistakes are going to happen. From also your audience development, because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to play music for people and people to attend. And so I guess that's a bit of a business element of it, but to also understand that that's something that develops organically, with a bit of push from media and marketing and all that kind of stuff. But in the outlet, the people that will come to your event will be friends, family, and fools. And those people that you have to really nurture and get them to work their networks and their networks to sort of let it all start to sort of happen, and be intelligent with it. You need to know how to keep in touch with those people as well, and be constantly communicating to those people, be it online, face-to-face, or in physical collateral as well. That's probably a start. So that's the audience. And then the other thing is, just don't forget about your community. So some people, I'm gobsmacked that they don't email the Minister for Arts or write a letter or let these people know to come to their events, because it's those kinds of people, even your local councillor or anything like that, it's those kinds of people that are on those grant panels, or the ones signing off those grant applications, or the people that can actually come up to you and say, because they're in service positions, to say, hey, you look like you need some help. How do we help you do this? Or we've got this event, or you might, or I know this person. So it's really important to actually understand that your broader community, you're there to serve them, but they're also a real good source of information and help, so make it a real mutual event.
Okay, wise words indeed. Now we have a question from the gallery. In terms of the works that you've commissioned, is there a catalogue of these works that you've commissioned somewhere that people could look up? Or
no? To be honest, I've never thought about doing that before.
Maybe the AMC? Would there be a list?
Nessa's just gone, no.
I know.
There is, like, if you do Google my name in the AMC and Australian Music Centre, some of that will come up. But maybe I could make it my October job to write down a big list of what's happened in that space. So.
I think she gave you a thumbs up for that. Cool. Now, sort of moving on to some of your other performing the aspects of your career. Now, your orchestral playing, as I said, you do a lot of clarinet. You had a lot of clarinet orchestral experience, and you also said you did some saxophone orchestral experience. What were some of these experiences and repertoire that you covered?
Oh, I've done the Berg Violin Concerto,
Oh, yeah.
and that was really fascinating. Great. Is it? It's not viola, it's violin. It's far out. The Berg Concerto.
That one.
Yeah, that one. The lady up the front. Anyway, really, really cool. But what was interesting was that the conductor kept saying, "You're too loud. You're too loud. You're too loud." And so that was really interesting. That I thought I was playing exceptionally soft, and it still brought home the fact that that bell sticks out in front of you, not down.
Yeah.
And so that was something that, you know, and naturally, if the conductor says you are too loud, you are too loud. So you just basically inhale, don't blow. And yeah, so that's, I mean, you've got Old Castles, you've got Ravel's Bolero, you know, all the Romeo and Juliet's sort of stuff. What else? There's been some real eclectic stuff that's come up. I mean, all the Gershwin stuff. What else is in there? I mean, have a look at the book.
You've got your Burns.
Yeah, Prokofiev, Lieutenant Kijé. Yep. Bernstein, done that one. Well, those ones.
You've ticked most of the boxes pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, you go through the, you know, the list and go, yep, done it. And there's the few that you just go, I don't even know what that is, but so I've been very, very, very lucky with that as well. So that's been fantastic. Great experience. Really interesting, particularly with Ravel, is to how each conductor perceives the saxophone. So one conductor will just really want it to sound as jazzy as possible. Another conductor will actually know, I want you to sound like the clarinet player.
Yeah.
And you just, you know, how that clarinet player interprets it, and you just go, oh, okay, sure. Clarinet player's not glissing, but that's fine.
That's also interesting, like with the Ravel as well, like you got the soprano and tenor, and sometimes they want them to be polar opposites in that same performance too. So it's depending on what chair you're sitting in, you kind of good cop, bad cop.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Now, you're kind of uniquely positioned. One of the things, like classical saxophone players, you know, we may not always get the chance to perform with an orchestra, but you know, in terms of repertoire, it's certainly an aspect of the repertoire and literature that we should, you know, cover and study. As I said, you're uniquely positioned because you've done the clarinet side of things as well, and you've had, you know, a lot of sort of mileage in orchestras. What sort of advice would you give to younger players or like undergraduate players looking to sort of interpret orchestral repertoire, whether it be, you know, actually sitting in the orchestra playing, preparing for that, or even just sort of learning them just to sort of, you know, broaden their knowledge and musical the holistic understanding of the saxophone and its literature?
Yeah. I think, I mean, listening for a start, you can never do enough. And understanding that you're going to have to blend. It's not actually about sticking out and being the saxophone. It's actually about blending.
You're not always a soloist.
No. No. And you know, the usual thing for any audition as well, because you most likely will have to do a casual audition, is just play it in time, in tune with the right notes. If you're playing it musically, sadly that is a bonus, but of course they want to hear that. That is what they want to hear, but it's just, you're part of a big machine of moving parts, and if you're out of time, that's noticeable. If you're out of tune, that's really noticeable. And because if you're the only saxophonist, it's very easy to point the finger at you because you're the newcomer, and you might be on that really bad day where there's no casuals in the orchestra and you're it, and you happen to play the saxophone. So you may as well have a big placard above your head going, I'm the new person, or paint a big target on yourself. So it's kind of interesting. Another bit of advice I definitely would give people is watch the concertmaster. And don't just watch him, watch where he's moving his actual bow on the bridge itself. And so that's a real, if you're getting really confused about what's happening on the box there, because there can be some really interesting interpretations of the concept of conducting. I remember once seeing one person who, I swear, he was a combination of looking like he was being electrocuted and fly swatting at the same time.
Wow.
And I just looked at him and just went, I can't look at that. And so I just looked at the concert master and had a little bit more security there as well. So yeah, just listening, understanding what your role is, that you have to blend. If you're on tenor, you will have to blend with a cellist. You have to blend with the double basses, with the bass clarinetist that is most likely sitting next to you. If you're on alto, have a good listen to the horn players right behind you, because you're most likely going to be playing a lot of notes right dead in unison with them as well. And yeah, that's probably some of the biggest stuff. I don't know if there's more I should be saying, but
oh no, I think the point is, it's like anything that you would approach, chamber music, you know, even your solo repertoire and playing with piano, just knowing your part, doing your homework, and you know, just having a basic concept of tuning and listening and following.
Actually, that's the other thing. Know the score. You're going to be. I mean, you can walk in and not have the score on you or not have seen it. I wouldn't advise it, to be honest, because there's a lot of security again and just in knowledge and just knowing again who you're unison with, or even just if your ears aren't telling you, you can actually see on the score if you've got the third of the chord or the seventh, and then you know by just sheer logic what you're supposed to do with it. But being prepared enough to not literally have that target on you, because it's already there as soon as you hold up that instrument.
No, for sure. That reminds me of an experience I had once where we did Symphony Domestica, and I got roped in one of the bass sax parts and didn't have a bass sax, so I transposed it. And the part hadn't been transposed either, because it was in the C and F keys, the concert instruments back in the day. So I didn't know that because that wasn't on the part, because I only got given a photocopy. So when I looked at the score, I realized I had to re-transpose it. And so there's certainly, check the scores. That's the moral of that story. And you're spot on. Now, you just out of curiosity, with the doubling and obviously, you know, getting into shows, now, was it sort of starting in this particular field? Was it a case of being asked, like just randomly, or was it something that sort of you fell into, like depping, or like how'd you sort of get started on that particular showboat? Pardon the pun.
So the music theatre was like I was saying before, where someone fell sick and I got called up at the last minute. Well, it was actually, they were sick, and it was like, come in 2 days, because I think they got sick on the Sunday night and Monday was the off, and then I got to play on the Tuesday. So did that. And so that was, at least from a doubling perspective, I gained a bit of a reputation for that. Then I also got asked to be in the show Phantom of the Opera in 96, 97. And so that was 6-month contract of being the clarinet, bass clarinet and E-flat clarinet player with that. So that's 6 months of Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yep, that's a lot.
That was a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber. And so that said, I got to sort of gain a lot of skills in there as well. And then it just started again to snowball after that. People knew you played the saxophone, and so I would always get because also bass clarinet was something that was my specialty, because largely that's what my Churchill Fellowship was actually on. You'd always get the bass clarinet, tenor, baritone clarinet chairs, so there wasn't really any flute, and I was completely okay with that. And it wasn't until the colleague rang up and said, "Hey, can you play the flute?" "No." "Will you learn it in 3 months?" "Okay." So again, that just sort of happened that way.
Okay. Now, I'm always amazed by, like, for instance, yourself, just the ability how effortlessly you can switch between all the different instruments, and also your students as well. They have, they all come out, playing at least one double from studying with you, and I think that's a really important skill to have, particularly in this day and age, just in terms of being more employable and give you more versatility for options in terms of performance and teaching, of course. What advice would you give for doublers in terms of, like, how would you sort of work on your doubling, and what sort of things people should be working on in terms of developing those skills? I've found that doubling is something that largely, yes, you can learn all the instruments separately, and you could even invest in, there's a book called by Chris Fadala
on woodwind doubling, and it's got that you sort of swap from instrument to instrument, and you can play in all these different styles. So it's actually really quite a comprehensive book, and you can do that. But your best learning is actually going to be in the field, and so yeah, it's one of those things where the more mistakes you make, the better a doubler that you're going to become. And so, yeah, you'll never forget your first time playing piccolo, and you'll never forget, you know, your first time playing, you know, low A's on a baritone really quietly when you're really supposed to, and just, you know, those kinds of things. So, and you won't put yourself under those kinds of pressures in the practice room. Unless something's wrong with you. So it's just, so it's better to sort of learn in the field, I think. And so how you do that, well, a bunch of ways. Even if it's a case of that you go, okay, well, I want to do amateur theatre, pro-amateur theatre, sit and watch someone, nag them until they actually offer to, you know, you to depth for them, or start up your own stuff, you know, start up your own small chamber ensemble with like-minded people who want to double on their instruments as well, put on concerts, put on events. That's probably the best way if you're really super serious about that. I mean, jazz musicians, you see them a lot, basically pick up a different instrument and start playing jazz flute, and I'll put that down and pick up another instrument and do that. And so if that's an area that you're actually in, just go and do it. In general, I mean, I think I was just very lucky that I got asked, but as soon as I got asked, I just made sure that I had the best setup as well, because there's no point in fighting your setup. So you need to have really good instruments, and also instruments that progress really nicely from one to the next. So there's absolutely no point in you having an incredibly open saxophone mouthpiece if your clarinet that you're used to is a really closed, has a more closed kind of approach to it. You're better off having something very similar to your clarinet, so that you can at least still make a good sound on that saxophone, but it's not going to be a really unbelievable transition from one to the next. That you can do, but that takes time to get used to, like literally takes age. And and a little bit of less of, you know, stress of worrying or anxiety about, you know, how you're going to sound. So yeah, so good gear, good setup, a smart setup, good information, and just forcing yourself to get out there and learn in the field.
And I think that the concept of the smart setup too, I think that is really applicable, particularly for like a saxophone major at a university, and they're looking to double on the different saxophones, like having something that's going to be easy to transition between, particularly if you're someone who predominantly maybe an alto or tenor player, and then you want to go into soprano or baritone. Having something that is comparable, I think, is important.
Yeah, because again, at the end of the day, particularly in music theatre, what they're looking for is, you know, can you play in time? Can you play in tune? Can you play the right notes? Specifically, are you consistent? And if you're battling your instrument, you're not going to be able to do any of that. And also, you know, can you play in styles? So I wouldn't call myself a brilliant jazz improviser by any stretch of the imagination, but I can at least absorb and replicate a jazz style that's required in that musical theatre context. Yeah. And likewise, you know, can you pull out your classical? Can you sound like so? And you get the most bizarre requests in the music itself, you know, a la Shostakovich, and it's just like, okay, sure, I'll do that.
Sure.
Like, you know, and just,
whatever
you
reckon. Yeah,
exactly. You have to be a real chameleon.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's certainly a true thing. Now, another question from the gallery from Brendan. He's just put Leger reads ? Does that mean, do you want to see if Dyer uses them, or what she thinks on them, or?
Yeah, just when you were talking about having setups that are very consistent, especially if you've got something that hasn't been played for 15 minutes and you have to pick it up and play in whatever style, do you have you used them, or do you recommend them?
Yeah, I've got in my clarinet case, I've got a big stash of Leger reeds. They're all numbered from 1 to 12. Because they only, like, once they've heated up for about half an hour, they don't work anymore, and you've got to move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. And with that, that's my emergency support for if I'm in a situation in the pit where I've got air conditioning beaming down on me or beaming down on my instruments. And it actually happens, funnily enough, more often than you'd think. And so if I'm in that situation and I know that I have some kind of solo that's actually going to squeak, if it's a really dry reed, I'll pop that on. Now, I've only experimented with clarinet, and to be honest, I've tried it on the saxophone and I didn't like it that much. I wasn't a fan, but I do know Legier's, they're constantly updating and doing fabulous things with their products. So I've been a bit lazy lately and haven't tried anything, but I should. You've reminded me, Brendan, that I should.
Yeah. Well, funny you should say that. They actually brought out a new line quite recently for saxophones. And also, I would recommend, Daddario brought out a synthetic reed as well. Probably recommend checking that out too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that one, Brendan. Now, I want to talk about a really unique thing that you did. Well, everything you do is unique, but this thing was something that I saw and I was just like, wow, that's amazing. And it was probably one of the first times I actually met you face to face, and it was at the World Sax Congress in Strasbourg. And you actually got the opportunity to perform a concerto with the Mulhouse Symphony Orchestra there. And we talked about Tom Green earlier, the composer, and you actually had commissioned a concertino for yourself on soprano, saxophone, and orchestra. How did this come about? Like, how did this commission? This, like, having a substantial work like this, particularly by an Australian composer, is an amazing feat. So how did it happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, I always say to my students that your biggest opportunities are going to come from your contemporaries, and in those contemporaries, you want to make sure that you are having really fabulous mutual friendships with composers, because they're the people writing the future, literally, without sounding too sort of silly. They are literally writing the future of music. And so Tom had done a lot of work with us with the Queensland Conservatorium Saxophone Orchestra, and also had written some stuff for Collusion, which was just really beautiful and absolutely fabulous. And so when the calls for submission for, who wants to play with an orchestra for the World Saxophone Congress, I popped in a bunch of stuff, and I included a couple of movements of Tom Green's that Collusion had recorded on one of our CDs for that. And funnily enough, so it went to the panel, and I think Philip Geis was the one that emailed back and said, hey, we were really fascinated by that piece. That was really, really interesting. Could you get the composer to do an elongated version of it? Because it was it was just a small little movement. And so so I went back to Tom and said, hey, they loved that. Would you like to do that? And he said, yeah. So he literally put that together, and that was for, alto saxophone and symphony orchestra. So it wasn't full. I don't think it was like a full like triple winds. I think it was like double winds, but it was still sizable, like a sizable ensemble. And did a great job of doing that. So that's how that came about. So again, I was really, really fortunate. And again, it was just a case of seeing an opportunity and seeing it for what it is, asking the people, would you be interested in being part of this? And the answer was yes.
Oh, for sure. So. And as I said, it's an amazing thing to see a Australian concerto being performed at one of these events, because I don't think that happens very often.
No, not at all. And I think, I see it still to this day as a huge privilege and a wonderful learning opportunity. And I was really sort of felt a lot of responsibility for Australian composers and musicians, for Tom, all saxophonists. And I have to say huge amounts of imposter syndrome, because, again, I think having been highly trained in clarinet, there's that imposter syndrome that just, you pick up the saxophone and you just think, oh, yeah, I shouldn't be doing this. But it'd been a long journey by that stage, and there was a lot that I'd popped under my belt with the saxophone. And then by the time I got up there, I'm just like, I don't care. I'm here, and this is just fantastic, and I'm having a great time. And it was beautiful music as well. So,
fair enough. And you did you get the opportunity to perform it afterwards at other settings? I think there's a reduced version as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's a reduced version. We did it in Brisbane with a scratch orchestra a couple of times, actually, sort of on Sunshine Coast and Brisbane. Did it in Melbourne with the Melbourne Sinfonietta as well. And it was all really interesting how different conductors interpreted it compared to the chamber music version. I mean, the longer version only had elements of the chamber one. It was very sort of brought out, but at the same time, you've got in your head how you want it to sound, and Australians will play it more, funnily enough, true to how it should be played. And then you go to a French-German orchestra and the conductor has it in a certain way. So there had to be like a bit of conversation of like, oh, actually this is how it should go. But you don't actually have much rehearsal time at all. It's turn up, say your name, play, go, next person has their job, next person, so there was,
well, particularly with congresses, I know they're quite, for lack of a better word, insane when it comes to rehearsal times, and most people are involved in several projects, so you're running around between rehearsals and you don't get much time to see anything. But yeah.
It's pretty hectic.
Highly recommend it though. Cool. All right. Now, were there any other standout experiences to date that you've had as a saxophone soloist, whether it be in a smaller ensemble configuration or anything like that? And if so, obviously you probably do, but in terms of like anything that stands out and reasons for why those particular performances sort of stick in your mind more than others?
I guess there's my work I've done with the Queensland Conservatorium Saxophone Orchestra. And I mean, those journeys were particularly special. 2012, we went to Scotland, but we also went to Greece, performing at the International Society of Music Education. So we had turned it and a whole bunch of other different stuff. We went to London and sort of did a few things there, and then traveled to Scotland, and then we went to Greece. And so it was, a big epic journey. And then likewise with Strasbourg, we went to, where did we end up going? Manchester, Paris, Strasbourg as well. So those were sort of, that was another 20-day sort of event. And forming the Australian Saxophone Orchestra as well, and commissioning music for that. And so all of it was commissioned. I mean, 2015 was really interesting because I also got a grant to record all the music that we had commissioned for the Queensland Clarinet and Saxophone Orchestra to record at the end of the year as well. So that was pretty significant. So those are quite amazing. I have to say, again, I guess for me, everyone has sort of different experiences, but for me, it's sort of connecting with different musicians and how you connect musically. So a couple of years back, did a performance with Sophie Min, and she's a Korean-Australian jazz pianist, highly creative person, unbelievable, phenomenal player. And I really, 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 really wanted to play Fuzzy Bird with her because I knew particularly that improv section that she'd just absolutely smash it. And it was just so much fun. So I said to her, we've got to record. And so funnily enough, in these COVID times, this is probably the first time I'm actually going to be able to sit down and actually start editing the thing we actually recorded 2 years ago. And finally sort of put that together. But we recorded Fuzzy Bird, and we recorded a bunch of Andy Scott stuff and Miss Lanka and all that kind of stuff, which she played. And she's a jazz musician that interprets music in a very jazz way. She hasn't been classically trained, really. So to the point that I actually had to tell her what the soft pedal actually meant in the actual music, and so that kind of stuff. But incredible musicians. So I think, those kinds of people that you just perform with and you click straight away on this sort of other level, I think that's standout for me.
And you mentioned before the Australasian Saxophone Orchestra. You're a big advocate of keeping the saxophone community alive, and you're quite proactive in finding opportunities for us to all get together and play together, and whether it be at a conference, a congress, or whatever, or opportunity to play in a saxophone orchestra like that. But this particular project was quite unique because I think it was the first time that a bunch of us from across Australia actually gotten together and played together, and that was quite a thing because like, oh yeah, met you, how you going? And then like we just first time we actually made music together. What was the sort of the impetus for this to sort of start that particular project? Was it just something that you felt like because we're all going, we got a good opportunity for us to get together and play, or?
Yeah, I think as Australians, we've got something really to be proud of as our community. The way I see it is that we're all really fabulous musicians and fabulous people. And again, it's just like when you put any kind of group together, you put them together because they're people you like um, and you trust, and they happen to be good musicians. And I did see it as an opportunity. I was like, well, we're all going. Gee, it'd be really great if we could represent what we're doing in Australia, because I think in absolutely every city, everyone's doing fantastic work, and it would be really fantastic if we could be actually seen as this unified front, I suppose. And again, just the curiosity in me that just went, let's see what it sounds like, you know. Like, and so and an option or an opportunity for musicians, composers to actually compose for it as well. And I knew that there'd be people absolutely enthusiastic about writing for the medium. Yeah. And I just thought we've got a lot to be proud of. We've come a long way in a very short amount of time compared to our European and US colleagues. And there's a lot to celebrate, so why not do it together?
Yeah, for sure. And it was speaking from first-hand experience. It was quite a fun opportunity to work in the two iterations of that group, or three even now.
Yeah, we did it in Melbourne, I think. Yeah, so yeah.
And yeah, it's just it's a blast. And yeah, the music, it's all Australian music, and similar to what you've spoken about before, getting contemporaries to write for the group. And yeah, it's just a great get together, and yeah, good hang and good time to play. So yeah, we'll definitely do it again. Neil's definitely just put his hand up to have a crack at it, since he's now an honorary Australian.
He's now an Aussie. Yeah.
He's an Aussie. So yeah, we should make it happen once things settle down a bit.
Definitely.
Now we've talked about your playing career. There's a lot going on there, of course. Obviously not at the moment, like everyone else, sorry. But there will be again once things settle down. But you're a wonderful and fantastic educator. And as I said before, the caliber of your students that you produce, just fantastic. And they're just, fantastic players. They're really open-minded in terms of their approach to music, and they're very resilient and versatile. And I think that's a fantastic thing that you've done there in building that saxophone community up in Queensland. But not only are you a proactive teacher, but you're a proactive researcher as well, and particularly in the field of teaching and learning. Your research output reads like a rap sheet in terms of the amount of things you've done, and there's some really interesting topics. But before we get too crazy on that, we did touch base about your Churchill Fellowship, and I know it's sort of geared towards clarinet and bass clarinet, and you had sort of mentioned some of the teachers you talked about, but what was the sort of the project that you had in mind with the fellowship? Like, I know you were approaching clarinet teachers and getting some researching the pedagogical methods that they had, but could you tell us a little bit more about what this project was?
It was primarily about the bass clarinet.
Okay.
And it was an instrument I just absolutely loved. Played it and just went, yeah, I like this.
Fair enough.
I really, really like this. And so, I literally just wrote down a list of all the who's who is in bass clarinet, and just went, I wonder how I can learn from all these people. And then a Churchill Fellowship concept floated past my face. I suppose back then it would be on a poster because there was no social media. Back in the days. And so so I literally because what you have to do, and still do now, I would assume, is that you basically have to set up the whole thing like as if you're going to go, and have it all in place, then apply. And so again, there was no email or anything back then, or the email was just starting to get off the ground. And so I was literally ringing up people and saying, hi, you don't know me, but I'd really like to have lessons from you. Is that okay? And they'd say yes. And I'd say, cool, right. I need you to write a letter saying that you agree to teach me. Yep, great, got that. And so I literally got that from all those people and culminated that, did the application. And there was a couple of rounds where initially I was actually only wanting to go, funnily enough, for a couple of weeks. And they kicked back and said, your application's strong, flesh it out for longer. So I said, okay. So I did that and fleshed it out for 5 months. And so, kept getting more letters, and then did the resubmit, and then had an interview, and then they said, yep, you're good to go. So the idea was basically to get as much knowledge in as short amount as possible. And to be honest, I kept a diary of all the lessons, and I'm actually still unpacking it all.
Oh, wow.
Even now, and that was 24 years ago. So
wow.
24 years, 23 years ago. Yeah. So, so it took me to America, many places in Europe. And it was, an incredible time. Met some lovely people and amazing teachers and just absolute inspiration. Saw some incredible music and, musicians. It was just incredible.
Nice. Now we have another question from Brendan. Was Harry Sparnay on that list by any chance?
Yeah. So I spent 3 months with Harry. He was originally a tenor saxophone player, and he didn't play it anymore by the time I got to him. He just said no. Look, to be honest, actually, I don't know before he passed away if he actually got back into the tenor saxophone. Actually, I don't know, but when I got to him, it wasn't coming out of the case. So he was very focused on the bass clarinet.
Okay, cool. Well, my next question was going to be, what sort of things did you find from all that? But it sounds like you're still even digesting all that information to this day. So maybe it's still early days to come to any particular conclusions or anything you sort of come through.
It was, I think probably everyone has their own concept of sound, just in general, and that's fine. I think when you're an Australian and you actually leave Australia and you go to different countries, you can actually hear a distinct approach just purely because of cultural so that was really interesting to see and hear as well. The concept of how to breathe and blow your instrument was really diverse and, to be honest, at times quite confusing. But I think I was lucky for the most part that every teacher I went to, weirdly enough, built on the back of the knowledge of the one before. And so it didn't get too confusing, because that was one thing I was actually really worried about, was that there'd be just all these really super contrasting approaches, and I would get thoroughly confused. But they were fantastic, and everyone basically just saw that I had a small amount of opportunity, so they just literally just filled my head with a whole bunch of stuff and gave me lists and lists and lists and illegal photocopies of music as well, because they just knew that you just have to have this and this is what you have to practice. And it was really good.
All right. Just a comment from Niels. You'd be pleased to know that Harry actually did get his second wind playing the tenor saxophone again, and quote, thoroughly enjoyed playing again.
Nice one on you, Harry.
Now, going into more of your research, now do correct me if I'm incorrect, because more often am than correct these days, just rushing around with things. But some of your other more recent research projects, like your PhD, is examining the area of professional musicians, and in particular examining the musician's sustainability in music or vocational preparation. Now, this is quite a very big topic, I would imagine, but is there any way you could sort of give us a bit of a brief summary of what this particular research field is about?
So my PhD study was called My Life as a Musician, Designing a Vocation Preparation Strand to Create Industry-Prepared Musicians. And so in a nutshell, in caveman speak, I interviewed a lot of musicians, surveyed a lot of musicians, surveyed faculty, focus grouped students, and also spoke to a lot of key industry leaders in Australia. And so that was a lot of data. So all of that just all culminated, and plus my own autoethnographical approach to how I run my own career. So all of that basically then got drilled down into, okay, well, what are the things do we need to be teaching at undergraduate level? And then designed a whole curriculum of 3 courses within a Bachelor of Music program, which I currently teach at the moment. So that was that in a nutshell.
Right. No, it's cool. I have to say your title was much better than my doctoral title. It we won't go into that. But anyways, maybe another time. Now, in terms of this particular research area, why did you feel the need to examine this particular topic?
Yeah, I think because again, I got asked asked in 2010, we're going to start up these courses. Will you do it? Yes. And then got into it, and then realised there was no publications at the time on this topic. It was literally just a developing field. B, I wasn't entirely sure what I was teaching the students was the right thing to do, and people were sort of sending me mixed messages as to what should be in the course. So I thought, right, okay, the only way to sort of really make this rigorous and defendable, I guess, is to actually go in and actually start studying. And weirdly though, it's been just a progression of what I've always been fascinated in musicians' lives. And so I used to be on the Australian Clarinet Saxophone magazine, and always used to interview clarinetists. It's kind of like what you're doing at the moment. So clarinetists and saxophonists, and either on the phone or send them questions, and and that was also overseas as well as whatever. So you do all the different time zones and everything. So it was weird. It was kind of like a natural progression of nosiness from just some saxophone and clarinet players to more broad scale Australian portfolio career musicians as well. So I think it came from there, and I'm still actually quite fascinated about musicians' lives, because I do think that musicians are the super beings of the universe, and there's just so much that they can do, and they're really adaptable as well. So my current, most recent research is actually looking at the transferable skills of musicians and how they actually utilize those in non-music workplaces as well.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, that's sort of going to bring on my next question. But it sounds like it's sort of become a bit bigger than Ben-Hur, and sort of an ever-evolving topic, as most doctoral research topics tend to be. What were sort of the outcomes and conclusions that you found that for this particular topic, in terms of, basically what you're teaching in the course that you're delivering now, I guess?
Yeah. I think, there's the outcomes fall into how we view musicians, or what musicians are and what they're currently facing and what they will continue to face. And then there's also the issues of not just what should be in a curriculum for student musicians, but how they'll respond to it as well, because everything's got to be relevant and relative. So in that context, it's just, if it's real, relevant, respectful and inspiring, then you're fine. With the musicians themselves, what I really noticed was that confidence is absolutely at the core of everything. If you're not backing yourself, things won't go ahead in general. The other thing is just the absolute importance of your network and the people around you. So, and it has to be a real mutual, organic group of people as well, that just literally look after each other. And also the importance, funnily enough, of social support. So not just musicians, but also your family, or at least your pseudo family, your group of friends that no matter what are going to say, hey, Nathan, it doesn't matter if you stuffed up that piece or whatever, you're still a great musician, keep going. So that there is that as well. So that confidence at the core of your identity is just absolutely imperative. And so that's why sometimes you see some musicians just larger than life, I guess, in some ways, and they attract those other people that are larger than life, and only good things are going to happen. And just being open to learning as well is just incredibly important.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a great topic, and I think probably quite relevant in this day and age as well. Like, certainly a lot of things we can unpack there and maybe apply, particularly in the current climate of COVID, I guess, to help with musicians and getting through this trying time. But anyway, in terms of future research projects, is there anything in the pipeline that we should keep an eye out for?
Research projects?
Yeah.
So in addition to the transferable skills, because I got a new researcher grant for that, so that's a Griffith sort of based grant, I suppose. The other thing I'm looking into with a colleague of mine who's a physio is the accent method for wind musicians. So
Ah,
there's been a lot of study on accent method for vocalists.
yep.
And the thing that I sort of find is interesting is that as opposed to vocalists, we have something in our mouth that we have to blow against that has a form of resistance that singers don't experience.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the accent method is being taught to wind players, you know, as the thing to use and how to sort of use your internal muscles and the transverse abdominis and all that kind of stuff. So me and a friend of mine, funnily enough from school way back when, are having a bit of fun with an ultrasound and just starting to sort of make some findings about how it's actually different from singing versus wind playing,
Mm-hmm.
and how to actually incorporate the method, still the integrity of it, but to actually understand the differences as well. So that's one little sort of pet project. Yeah, I'm just trying to think what the other one. I've got a pet interest in, or a growing interest in strategic foresight. And so that's something that I'm continually developing and practicing and looking at and researching as well. So there's been a lot, there's going to be a lot more futurist articles, you know, so there's been a couple already about what musicians' lives will look like in 2050 and all that kind of stuff. And there's going to be a bit more of that kind of stuff as well.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you got your plate full, that's for sure. Now the so going back to the saxophone side of things in your position there at the Queensland Con, as I said before, the sort of the sense of community and that saxophone school is quite unique, and it's a great vibe, and I've had the good fortune to visit there, and the students are great, and it just seems like it's a really positive environment, particularly like it's not competitive in any way. It's like everyone's sort of bouncing off each other in a very positive manner, and it's quite a very it's great. That's all I can say. But in terms of that particular school, did you have to start that from scratch, or was there an existing school when you started your position there? And how has it sort of developed from when you started to where it is now?
Yeah. Well, probably firstly, this year I've taken a hiatus from teaching saxophone.
Okay.
Because of that grant that I got for researching, I had to find some space. So Martin Kay's doing that this year.
Mm-hmm.
But when I first got to, I think it was 2008 or 2007 was when I first was asked to teach saxophone. And I think I was asked because I kept feeding the conservatorium all my students. And so they just suddenly just said, well, why don't you just keep teaching them? So that was really, really nice. And then that just, again, snowballed a little bit more. But there was a lot of investment to start off with. So there wasn't a saxophone orchestra or even an ensemble. Mm-hmm. So I literally just started that. I didn't get paid for it. I just started it. And it was massive. Actually, Brendan probably remembers being part of it. So there was like 30 saxophonists, all in the one room. And it was like, if you can remotely play one, you were able to be in it. And it was big and it was noisy and it was fabulous. And then we're able to pare it down to a nice sizable 14. And it was really interesting. The students were fabulous, and they always are, and they were really grateful to have to be just part of something, or that someone actually just went, oh, look, let's just do this. And so it was a case of, okay, well, let's just do this. I invested a couple of $1,000s in a saxophone orchestra library as well, and just literally just said, right, ask the library, the Con library, will you be able to invest in saxophone orchestra music? And they went, saxophone what? No. And so okay. So I said, all right, I'll just buy it, that's fine. So I just bought a whole bunch of music, and we just started playing it and got into that and developed it. And like I was saying before, I just invited guest lecturers in just to sort of get a little bit more momentum. And I also recognized there was some really fabulous students there. Like, for example, the Borrego Saxophone Quartet, as we know it now, like all those students were there, and they were just so deserving of the best education possible. So it was just a case of just developing it over time and being something that they felt that they were part of growing as well. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. And I think the collegiality, particularly in touring, helps a great deal because, there's been some situations where I've thought, maybe it's not as cohesive as this year, but then we come back from tour and they're all just, you know,
Mm.
in each other's pockets, and it's really, really nice to see. Lately, like in the last year in particular, we had a separate saxophone workshop where I ran it differently just to see what would happen. I wanted the students to take more ownership of their own learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would get up in their workshop. We didn't have a piano accompanist, so it was just get up and play. And everyone had to play every week. Yep. As well, just get up and play. But what they could do is that they could play where they could play twice. But what they did the first time round was that they would point to each other saxophonist and say, okay, I want you to comment afterwards on intonation, or I want you to comment on phrasing, and I want you to comment on musicality, I want you to comment on tone, I want you to comment on rhythm. And they would literally delegate roles around the group. Okay. And then once they played, whoever played is able to speak first and literally defend what they did. Wow. And then they basically can point and ask who they want the advice from, so that they had complete control and ownership over how they were being educated. But it was still a group, like, you know, the village was basically helping each individual person. So that worked out really well. And then just having concerts where they perform, we'd video it, and then we'd all sit down and then just watch it back and give it critique. So, and in enough time that when their final recitals come around, they really felt seasoned and ready to play. So, and we would do it in, you know, public places where audience could actually sort of turn up and view it. So it was actually a real event.
Nice.
Yeah.
It sounds like that whole process really enabled everyone to have a sense of ownership in what they were developing, as opposed to just sort of turning up and getting spoon-fed stuff. Like they were, it just sounds like it sort of put a lot more responsibility on them, and consequently got a lot more out of it, I guess. Yeah.
And, you know, and they could sort of get up and play, with more awareness, but also just with more, well, I did that, you know. Yeah. I was there, but I did that, you know, like they could feel that way, you know, they have that ownership. And again, just knowing that they were commissioning, you know, from a composition perspective, even in the saxophone orchestra, they were commissioning their immediate colleagues, you know, the composition department, or emerging composers, or that fact, you know, an established composer was actually willing to write for them, or that we had written a grant for an established composer to write for them, that they would then record because of this grant as well, was really powerful. Yeah.
Nice. Now, can you tell us, just give us a very brief sort of outline of what sort of constitutes and makes up an undergraduate course there, like in terms of the saxophone specific types of things that a student would experience during their time in their undergrad?
Saxophone specific. Yep. So workshops, saxophone orchestra, chamber music, definitely. I was running actually a woodwind doubling ensemble for a while there, which you just turned up and played badly and then ran away. And but that was good because I was like, right, everyone's playing flute. We're all playing flute. Everyone's sounding like a grade 5 band, but that's okay. It's the only way to learn. Right now, everyone play clarinet. Right, everyone plays saxophone. Oh, thank goodness. And then it was just so there's that. They have wind workshop as well, as saxophone workshop, which I believe this year they're calling it sax hangs. So they're just which is really cool. And we would sometimes have a tech class where it would be just nothing but technique. And also we have a repertoire class where you basically had to turn up, and various people, like only 3 people or 2 people each week, were delegated. Right, you have to present to the class, and they had to bring a piece of music, and we would have the score up there on the screen, listen to the music, and would be a case that we didn't listen to it just once. We listened to 3 or 4 different performances of it, and then basically had a chat about it as well. So the idea was that we're all listening together, critiquing together, and understanding what to listen for in music, and therefore how to play yourself. And it was kind of good because it was a way of other people going, oh, I hadn't heard that piece before, because as we know, the saxophone is one of the newest wind instruments, and its repertoire is just continually evolving. And so the people going, oh, I haven't heard that. Wow, okay, you know, tell us about that piece. What's it about? So yeah. And then you have your basic courses, the courses I run, My Life as a Musician. So by the time you've come out of that, you'll be able to have really good audio-visual editing skills. You'll have a bit of an idea of what opportunity actually looks like, and so and an understanding of who the mover and shakers or the the industry representatives are in the country. You'll also be able to write a grant really well, design and conceive a project, and then by fourth year, pre-COVID, it was go into a school and do a performance education show that's pedagogically sound. This year, it was turn it into an online split screen Wiggles meets Sesame Street show. So yeah, that was pretty epic, and the students did an unbelievable job. So yeah, so that's that. Wow. Performing wind orchestras, symphony orchestra, and then you've got your literature subjects and all the other stuff that goes on with that.
Right. So, wow, it seems like a fairly well-rounded course, and you learn a lot.
Oh,
that's great.
Theory and oral.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, and all that standard stuff.
All that standard stuff.
Now, I know it's a bit of a tough question because every student's unique and different, and there's no sort of one correct way of teaching per se. But in terms of your teaching philosophy, as from a general perspective, how would you, what would be your teaching philosophy? Would be the question.
I think my teaching philosophy is to let the student be open to opportunity, that there is not just one method as well, and to be as curious as possible, and not take what I say as gospel, funnily enough, and always be looking out for new innovations as well. So I think that's probably it. But in the end, I don't know, teaching philosophy, I haven't actually really sat down and thought about what it is in a saxophone context. I have from like all my other classes as well. But I think the same thing still remains. Is it real? Is it relevant? Is it respectful? Is it inspiring? Yeah. And that's probably the underlying one. But the big thing is just being really super responsible as a human being to your music community. Like, don't just play it, create it as well, or encourage other people to create for you and make really decent sort of relationships. And don't just settle on just the saxophone. If you feel that you can actually sort of branch out and look at different instruments, because your knowledge of those is actually going to enrich what it is that you're doing with your saxophone. I mean, that group that had was it Sebastian Pottmeyer and Sabina Meyer?
Alliage.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when I saw those guys play, it was almost like they were orchestral musicians that just happened to have saxophones in their hands. The colours that they got out of that, and that just tells me that they just have this wealth of listening that's just extraordinary.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. I went twice when they came out.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a different program. It was great.
Wow. Very jealous. We only got the one.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Now, I have another question from, now I do apologise, I'm really bad with pronunciation, so do forgive me. Nessia has a question asking if you have also been involved in any adjudication or syllabus creation, such as the Amy B.
Yeah, so adjudication, yes. Examiner is for Amy B, definitely. And syllabus creation for the Amy B, no, but I did audit the saxophone syllabus a bunch of years ago. So that was the one that Barry Cockcroft and Jim Nightingale put together for the Amy B. So I got asked to basically audit it. And the reason behind that, I think, was because there was just so much music from Reed Music, because he was the only publisher publishing that stuff. They had to get a third party to come in and take a look at that. And so, so I was able to audit that and go, wow, look at all this new stuff. This is really cool. So, so that's basically been my experience there.
Okay.
Yeah. Brendan, we won't talk about that.
Yeah, it's a saxophone Q&A. We might save that for the clarinet Q&A session. Now, we're coming to the home stretch. I do appreciate your time, Diane, and I do apologise. I just look at the clock and I just realise it's been a long time, and I'm sure you'll be hankering for a glass of wine after this. But home stretch. But just at the tail end of this interview, there's a couple of things I just want to ask, and very quickly we'll try and get through it. Now, the hot topic for the moment is COVID-19, and I'm sure everyone's sick to death of hearing this phrase, COVID-19. But unfortunately, it has had an impact on all of us in some shape or form. And in particular for us musicians in terms of our performance opportunities and gigs and teaching, of course, it's sort of hindered, a lot of things moving online and then moving offline and then back online. And anyway, the list goes on and on and on. But for you personally, how have you felt that it's affected your performing and teaching? I mean, obviously you talked about before, like you moved online, particularly with the larger classes and subjects that you teach, and in terms of just how it's affected, and what sort of things have you done to sort of keep yourself motivated? Is there any advice you can give to people who are, looking for something to sort of keep a bit of structure and routine in what they're doing musically?
Yeah. So let's see. Online teaching, I guess probably what's come out of it, which a lot of people are actually sort of saying, is that they found new and different ways of understanding what teaching is, and the pros and cons behind it. I mean, a lot of my colleagues have been saying that they've never seen their students right from the front. It's always been from the side. And so they've now realized that they have to move to the front and see what their WIN students are doing. I mean, when you're teaching large class, it feels like sometimes a little bit like radio. And, you basically say, welcome back to your own room. And, it's a bright and sunny day with light breezes going northeasterly. And, because you can't actually see them, you can see them in the chat every now and then. And you try to make it as collegial as possible. So that's been kind of interesting. I will say musicians are a face-to-face culture. I do think that face-to-face sharing is basically inherent to what we do with music. And I just think that at this point in time, that's quite lost in an online context. And there's even proven studies about brain and connection and what you do with your eyes and mirror neurons and the whole bit, there's a lot of studies basically saying face-to-face is actually much more beneficial. That said, it's brought out some different qualities in students that I hadn't sort of seen before, and it's certainly made me sort of think about how you teach and how you communicate particularly as well. So that's been interesting. From a motivation perspective, again, it's probably just listening to music that's been really good. I mean, I personally found for myself, I was getting so busy saying yes to everything. I've used this time to actually stop and think about what I want to do with my music. Like, I've been saying yes blindly so much, which can be a bit of an illness, that I've now stopped and thought about what I have to, what I really want to do. I'll just say goodbye to Peter. Bye, Peter. But I had an idea the pandemic was going to happen at some stage, or some kind of major disruptor. And so we actually renovated our house, and then we actually purpose-built a studio downstairs in a creative space. We've still got stuff to do. I can't really sort of move around, but there's this big space downstairs with the idea to basically do house concerts.
Nice.
And I'm getting a massive acoustic curtain popped in here. Just to sort of really sort of absorb the sound as well. And I'm getting shelves and all that kind of stuff up as well. So I've spent time plotting really more than anything, and having a really good sit down and big think about what I want to do. And that's not just playing, but also curating as well, and just dreaming up some crazy stuff. And we've also really lucky, just down the road from us, Metro Arts has moved from central Brisbane, so the CBD, to literally just down the road. And at the end of my street, there's also another performance venue. So I've just been sitting down and making this massive wish list of crazy stuff that I really want to do, and rebooting a more independent music career, rather than contractual. So Yeah.
No.
So for those that are a bit waning in motivation, you know, I think it's a case of listening to music, where possible, going to it. And if you can't, go to some stuff that's streamed online. Try to find the stuff that's really good quality as well. Maybe pick up a new instrument. And I won't call it an instrument. Pick up a new toy. I've got also my electric bass, ukulele, and a guitar back there that I'm really terrible at. Do not swear. Do not swear. I'm very terrible at. But yeah, it's been, particularly lately, I've been starting to pick those up just to get the brain working again. And
nice.
Yeah.
I picked up piccolo in the first lockdown. My neighbours didn't really like it, so I had to put the piccolo down. So that was my short-lived experiment with a new toy.
My husband and I have a deal that I can play the piccolo, but not while he's in the house at the same time.
Yeah, I think you need a license for those things, I think. But yeah, it's a great setup you got there. There's only one thing missing, and that's the bar when you have your concerts.
No.
You thought of that one.
There's a fridge. I don't know if you can see the fridge in the kitchen.
Very nice.
There we go. So yeah,
yeah. So like a doomsday prepper for concerts. It's very nice. Now, some really great words of advice there, and it's an interesting topic, this COVID-19 thing, because it's going to have a long-term effect on the musical landscape here in Australia and the saxophone community and musicians broader. And it's kind of interesting because you wrote an article for the Common magazine back in April, which was discussing your vision and ideas for a post-COVID Australian music scene. Could you tell us a little bit about the article, some of your thoughts and what you sort of envisage what might happen in the post-COVID music scene? And do you feel like those sort of predictions or ideas are still going to hold up in October of 2020?
Yeah. Yes, because I'm sort of seeing it all playing out already. So I guess a big crux of it was stuff that's already happening that we know. Physical and digital will just be a dual thing, particularly those in more institutionalized opera, orchestra, you know, the bigger institutions. They'll have to start breaking down into smaller groups and also including a lot more education into their programs as well, and a lot more community engagement. And that's already happening, in that context. I mean, another thing to sort of think about is that if we want to do a cross comparison of, over 100 years ago when we had the Spanish flu and end of World War One, I mean, they say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme. And so in that context, back then there was, funnily enough, a couple of years of economic depression that doesn't really get documented that much. But then after that was the Roaring Twenties. And so everyone was actually so keen to celebrate the end of the war and the end of the Spanish flu and all that kind of stuff that they just wanted to go and party. And so I think what we're going to experience this year, the rest of this year is not going to be so great. Next year's, to be honest, is going to be a bit sort of, that fish you get out of the water and it just lies on the beach and just flaps a bit. It's going to be a little bit like that, hoping for the tide to come back in. But after that, for the rest of the decade, I think strap yourself in, because it's actually going to be really, really fun. And musicians are going to be really, really well placed. And that's also on the back of that. There's been a lot of musicians that have been highly proactive, and they've started just to record, and they've started to compose, and they've started to sort of try to make meaning of life. And the broader public's sense of life in general, what it means to be human, has definitely, they've seen a lot of expression in music, and they're actually going to wanting to embrace that and culture in general, because they just haven't had access to that as well. And I think it's been, up until this point, something that's been possibly taken a bit for granted. And we're in this sweet spot where the online context, virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, still can't replicate it as well as what real life is. And artificial intelligence hasn't quite got there yet as well. So I actually sort of think that for the short term, it's it's not going to be so great, but for the long term, we actually have a lot to look forward to, and just to get ready for getting to say yes to everything.
Yeah. Because I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of yes once things,
that's the
settle down.
thing. Yeah. And I think probably, advice for young musicians as well is that in your approach to saying yes, don't say yes for rubbish money, because there will be, in that interim space, people will be taking advantage of musicians.
Yeah,
and I think a bit of a sour note there.
Yeah, well, it's true, because there is, even now, you can see there's a lot of people taking advantage of the fact that, musicians aren't playing, and, offering, maybe a meal, or, would share your website or something like that. And, it's really horrendous to see that kind of treatment to musicians. So, yeah, just word of caution out there for the young. Just make sure that you, do a gig and don't get done over, as they say. Now, on a lighter note, we're just going to bring it back a little bit, because we're coming to the end of the night, and it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you, Di. Like, there's just a wealth of information there, and we could just chat all night. It'd be great to have a chat, but maybe we can do that face to face over a beer at some stage. But we'll bring this to an end and we'll wrap it up. But just to, on a lighter note, let's bring it home. If you had 10 minutes to practice, and only 10 minutes, so say in between a student or something like that, what would you practice and why?
I'd practice long tones.
Yep.
Because I'm drawn to the sound, and I would practice overtones as well, because I really enjoy those. And also they're just, both of those exercises just kind of really sort of reset you and recenter your breathing, your tonal concept. I would actually probably just practice that. I wouldn't actually probably practice any music or anything like that. I wouldn't practice scales. I'd probably actually just do long tones. Stuff. Fundamental stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Have you seen the Donald Sinter book by any chance?
Yeah. That's a fantastic book. There's another one, actually, there's a couple that have come out in the last year. Sorry, she moves her flute to get this. There's this epic monologue of the John Hull.
Yes, I've got that one. That's a great book.
It's insane. And the amount of money they must have spent on that. And then there's also this one that I picked up in Zagreb by Mark Watkins, From the Inside Out. And that's unbelievable. I actually think he went blind putting it together, and you can sort of see, but he's actually... Yeah, he's gone right into the oral cavity and everything and checked it out. And
I've seen that guy on YouTube, I think. He's got this channel and he's talking about different articulations, and he has the camera and everything. Yeah, it's really in-depth.
His research is just insane. And so I've actually sort of learnt a fair bit and reaffirmed a lot as well. And kind of like, it's been really good, because like I was saying way earlier, that I would just sort of assume that I was the one in the wrong, or I'd hear people say stuff and I go, oh, that's not how I sort of think about it. And then reading his stuff, he confirmed the things that I had thought, I'm pretty sure this is how it should be, but oh well, so that's been really eye-opening.
Cool.
Yeah, so he launched that in the Zagreb conference in 2018.
Shame. I missed that. I was probably running between a rehearsal or two. But I wrote it down. I'm going to check it out for sure.
Yeah.
Now, just a couple of questions from the gallery. Brendan's asked, your favourite saxophone to play out of the soprano, alto and tenor, and the baritone. Do you have a preference?
That's hard. Yeah, that's really hard. Because, I'm going to be a fence sitter, Brendan. I'm really sorry, because they're all like different people, and it's all like different children, and it's asking to ask which is your favourite child. Brendan says the correct answer is the bass clarinet. Very funny. So no, they've all got their own qualities, and I love them all very dearly.
They sure do. If you ever feel inclined to play the bass, you're more than welcome to try this beast. It's a monster. But getting it to Brisbane will be another story. Now, again, apologies in advance, Nessia. Your favourite new work for solo saxophone by an Australian composer?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Favourite new work? Elena Katz-Chernon's concerto that she wrote for Michael Duke.
Yes.
That was amazing.
That's cool. You
Well,
actually performed that one, didn't you?
not that one, no,
Not
no,
that one, no.
no. But yeah, I saw it online, funnily enough, because it was in Sydney and I was up here basically. So yeah, and also anything by Kathy Lakuta
Yep.
as well. Yeah, her stuff is phenomenal. Yeah, I have to say Michael Duke and Dave Howie are just incredible at choosing composers and commissioning them and just producing unbelievable pieces of music. So
Yeah, no, it's the
champions.
Yeah, the HD duo is very proactive in commissioning works. Now Kathy Lakuta, the spelling. Oh, geez.
Likhuta.
Yep. Now Kathy, yeah, she writes a lot of great music, and yeah, she's written some great quartet music as well. I think a lot of her French horn music translates very nicely onto the tenor saxophone. So if she does happen to tune in, feels the need and wants to, adapt any of those, I'll put my hand up there.
Yeah,
But,
I'll have a chat to her. She's always looking for people to play her stuff. So
for sure. Now, Di, thanks so much for your time. I know it was a long session, but as I said, it was just so much information, and it was great having a chat, and actually great to catch up after such a long time. And we should do it for real, and I'm sure we will sometime soon. But in terms of, how do we keep in touch with, what's coming up with Di, and, how do we keep informed in the loop? Is there a mailing list? Is there a Facebook page? What's the best way to keep in the loop?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm really bad with that. I teach the students not to be bad, but I'm really bad. Yeah, I guess probably LinkedIn might be the best way.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn might be the best way because I sort of tend to keep that as my professional sort of thing. I have, funnily enough, I'm married to a web developer.
Uh-huh.
And he's set up a beautiful thing, and he just, every time I say, oh, we should get this thing published, he goes, content, I need more content. And I'm like, oh, yep, definitely. And then I have about 400 student assignments to mark, and I forget about my website. So at the moment, probably LinkedIn and the odd random Google search is probably the best thing to do at the moment.
Well, if you check out Google, there's plenty of material out there. Like there's plenty of your performances online on YouTube. A lot of your articles and publications are available that you can access and read, and there's so much material out there already. But just the good old Google search is probably a good way to do it.
It's a good stalker engine, yeah.
Sure is. All right, Di, thanks so much for your time again. Thank you all for joining us, and look, we hope you're staying safe wherever you are, and look, we'll be keeping on going with this series for sure. We'll be reining it back into New South Wales for the next session. I'll keep you posted about the guest because we've got a few lined up. But hope you're all staying safe. And another special thank you to Di. And if you do get a chance, please drop her a line, say hello. She's very active and does a lot of great things for the saxophone community, not only in Queensland but across Australia. So thank you and good night.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.